Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We'll give it just a moment or two for colleagues to make sure that they've come into the room, but we definitely invite you because we always like to live vicariously through you as we're wrapped in blankets and in the dark UK mornings to understand where you're joining us from in the world. So if you would like, please feel free to introduce yourself in chat and let us know which part of the world you're joining us from. But as I said, we're going to go for just another moment or two to allow colleagues to join us. Good morning, Rabia. Oh, Hong
End
Kong.
of the day.
Oh, see, this is where we all get very envious and wish we were where you are. Spain and Thailand and the UAE. Wonderful. It's so nice to see so many people joining us. Czech Republic. Somebody else in the UK. Good morning, Laura. Yes, dreary. That's definitely what it's like outside my window in Staffordshire, Cecilia. Oh dear. Okay, I think we can see people coming in thick and fast. So uh, just a couple of reminders from a housekeeping standpoint. We're obviously asking that you stay on mute for today's session, but if you do need any clarification on the topic that we're discussing today, then pop your questions in that chat and Polly and I will be monitoring that throughout the sessions. If you've got any future questions though for other themes, we'd ask that you continue to submit those through the registration, and then we'll make sure that that's the place that you can go to within our new micro site to find any information about today's session and any resources that we might mention. So we're going to get started, and today's topic this month isn't something that's new. In fact, there's research that goes back 30 years that demonstrates a clear relationship between the two areas of speech, language and communication needs, or SLCN, as you might hear us abbreviate it today, and social, emotional, mental health, or SEMH. And in the English Department of Education's SEN census in 2023 and 2024, speech language communications need was identified as the most common area of need, or primary need as it's identified in that particular data source, where almost a quarter, or just over a quarter in fact, of pupils were identified with those types of difficulties. And in the UK, as I'm sure there are in other parts of the world as well, there are several organisations, one of which is called ICAN, ICAN, if you're wanting to look for that later, or the Communication Trust. And they offer excellent support on their respective websites, but they often reference that children with speech, language and communication difficulties are at higher risk of mental health problems. And one study in 2018 identified that 81% of children with SEMH also have significant language challenges. Research also shows that there can be a link between those types of challenges and school exclusions, with one study suggesting that 2/3 of pupils at risk of exclusion from school have SLCN. And so the implications, the lifetime implications for difficulties in that area are significant, therefore. And it could mean that children are leaving school without the appropriate qualifications that might then impede the pursuit of employment or life opportunities. So although those are references specific to the UK, we have heard in our various conversations with colleagues overseas firsthand that international settings are feeling the same challenges, particularly in the years following the pandemic, where learners have been equally challenged with their speech, language and communication development. And I think it's really important to frame today's conversation and to recognise that we'd be forgiven for spotting the kind of behavioural challenges that come first, because they can be more apparent in our classrooms, can't they? But we do need to ask ourselves the question, how can we ensure that we don't miss the gaps in language, if they're there, that might be leading to some of those difficulties? And what steps can we take to support learners who might be experiencing those types of barriers? That overlap exists at all stages and ages in education, with colleagues in secondaries and high schools working just as hard to accurately identify where those barriers might be experienced. And that's enough from me. So now I want to introduce the person that we've been very privileged put my teeth in to have joined us today, Beth Morant. She's a highly specialist speech and language therapist from the UK who has extensive experience working with children who have language and communication needs in a range of different settings. And as well as supporting children and their families, Beth provides training for education staff and has guest lectured for speech and language therapy students and student teachers at several universities. So given how busy she is and how in need her skill set is, we're exceptionally grateful to her for finding some time to come and chat with us today. So thank you ever so much, Beth.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk. It's such an interesting topic, and just refreshing those statistics that you've just said, it's such an alarming topic as well. So I'm really pleased that we're able to talk about it today.
Absolutely. It's almost becoming not a special need, but actually just a common regular need that we need to be more aware of in our settings, isn't it? Can you get us started then, Beth, in terms of helping us to understand what we mean by communication and language, and why they're such important skills, and how we might begin to spot if those things are a barrier to learning? I know we've just had a conversation before we've gone live about the kind of EAL side of things, and we're going to park that part just in case anybody wonders why we don't talk around English as an additional language, because our focus today is communication and language. But Beth, could you get us started with an understanding around that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, language refers to all of the words that we use, all the words that we use and we know and we understand. It also includes how we use and adapt those words, so we can add endings onto words to change the tenses, for example. It also includes how we know which words to use in which certain situations and how to use language appropriately, as opposed to an idiom language. So I'm speaking English, but we have people from all over the world who speak in Spanish and French and Arabic, all lots of different languages there. So we're gonna look at EL differently. So then looking at communication is sort of the overall category that language and speech sit within. You can communicate just fine without any language. You can get up and leave the room, for example, or one of the children you work with might throw themselves on the floor. My children, if I give them any kind of vegetable for dinner, they communicate just fine with their facial expression that they don't like broccoli. So communication, yes, is the overall kind of category that language sits within. And then language is to do with the words and how we use the words and how we put the words into the correct order when we're expressing, or how we're understanding and interpreting words and their meanings when we're comprehending.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
I remember when I was a SENH and inclusion lead, certainly those sort of behavioural communication certainly came through with some of our students. And it is often said that behaviour is a form of communication. So acknowledging this close relation, as we mentioned in our introduction, could you perhaps clarify some of the links and how those particular behaviours might be an indication of an underlying communication problem?
Yeah, so it's really fundamental, actually, that as you're saying, behaviour is a form of communication. So as I've said, we don't need to do talking. You can have a person who is non-speaking that has really good language skills. They're just communicating those in a different way. So if we're looking at children from your perspective, from who have limited verbal skills, we might call non-verbal or non-speaking children, there's still communication happening for those children. It might be that you'll notice that the child will be standing next door to something that they're wanting, or they might be pointing, or there might be an indication that they like something because they sort of magnetize to it in the setting. If we're looking at a more mainstream setting, thinking of some of the statistics that Emma mentioned in the intro, particularly for the study for 2/3 of students who have been or who are at risk of exclusion of secondary mainstream school. It was a really interesting study, actually, the one that you referenced there. So these students have got spoken language, they are using spoken language, but actually they also had underlying speech and language difficulties. So there's a process that we use, that we have as humans. If a teacher was to ask a student, where's your pen? The student actually needs to understand those words. They need to understand the concept where, they need to understand your, they need to understand pen, then they need to understand why the teacher is asking me this question. They have to process all of those words. They have to retain the words. Is it my pen or the pen that I borrowed from my friend last week and I still haven't given back? So then they have to think about how they're feeling about that. And then actually they have to answer the question, where is I don't actually know where my pen is. Then they have to think about the words that they want to say in response. And then the brain has to tell the mouth the sounds to put in the correct order, the words to put in the correct order, and then to verbalize it. So there's this whole entire process, and it's just answering a 4-word question, where is your pen? But if at any point in that process, there's a difficulty or there's a speech and language and communication issue for that child, then there's a breakdown for that child. And it might just be much easier just to grab a pen and throw a pen to say, here is a pen, this is what you want, teacher, rather than answering the question, actually, I don't know where my pen is. I left it in my bag and I left the bag on the bus. Does that answer the question? I go off on a tangent.
It's a really good way of putting it, I thought.
Yeah,
I think it helps us to appreciate as well just how much is sort of going on simultaneously. I know we talk about the simultaneous skill set that you need for reading or for writing. I don't think we necessarily always appreciate that same thing happening when we're communicating and using language, do we? So I think hearing that, it's kind of a bit of an aha moment, even for me as a practitioner. You know, you're like, oh yeah, I suppose that it makes sense that sometimes it's the shortest route to kind of, you know, I'm giving you what you've asked for, but it might not necessarily meet with the kind of social requirements, which I guess isn't a priority when you're trying to process that level of information. I think one of the things that we know, especially with kind of all of our colleagues who've joined us today, colleges and schools are always keen to be proactive, whether they're a class teacher, a leader, a learning support assistant, or anybody in between. So I wonder, perhaps as the most important kind of takeaways for them today, whether you could share some strategies, Beth, that could be explored to help a child or a young person who might be demonstrating some of those types of behavioural challenges, we'll call them, because their barriers to language and communication are in place. What can we do to help those type of learners who might be experiencing difficulties?
Oh, happy to help and happy to share. Strategies are can be so simple to put into your daily working with your children. My main one, the first one that I have to tell myself, so I like to share with everyone else, is just to wait. Thinking of that process that I've just outlined, that has a process of processing that has to happen for the children. Just wait, count to 3 or count maybe to 5 in order for that child or the person that you're talking to have a think about those words, have a think about how they want to respond, and then to respond. It can be really tricky when you've got a busy classroom and 30 or 40 other children in your setting, and you're waiting, so there's a pause, there's a quietness in the conversation, and someone else might interrupt. But it does just allow that person that you're talking to that time to process, and it also allows if the situation's got a bit heated, it just allows that temperature to come down a little bit. So that's definitely my primary one, is just to wait, count to 3, count to 5, allow that processing time. My next one is to chunk. So I say this a lot, actually, a lot of the people that follow me online. Thinking of a chocolate bar, a massive chocolate bar. I'm going to eat it in one go, but I'm going to eat it bit by bit, chunk by chunk. In fact, they're really helpfully already pre-chunked, and you just snap a bit off and eat it. And you have to think about that when we're giving our spoken or written language, or if we're using signing or symbols as well with children, that too much in one go is too much. We have to break it down into smaller chunks. So the question, where is your pen, might be a smaller chunk of, I'm so sick of seeing you not doing any writing, you haven't written anything all day, where is your pen? So that's a longer piece of spoken information that a teacher might legitimately give to a child. But we need to just make it so it's a nice small chunk that the child will be able to process that information. So yeah, waiting and chunking are my 2 kind of main strategies. Want any more?
I think we could take at least another couple. Just for the benefit of colleagues, I've put Beth's own website in the chat, and there's a huge amount of resources there as well. There's a couple of other places that we've connected you to. But Beth, definitely, if you wouldn't mind maybe a couple more, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So the next one then is to model. It might not, thinking about how a child has probably understood what you said, but then they're not too sure about how they're wanting to respond. Then you can say, well, here is my pen. Where is your pen? So then we're modelling by showing the pen, and we're modelling by indicating and adding in extra signing and extra gestures to support the child. It might be, Do you have your pen at school today? Is your pen in your bag, which is still on the school bus? One of those things. So we're actually giving the words that we want our child to say back to us. Does that help?
But just one more question, if I could just, I'm desperate to squeeze every last drop of wisdom from you, but I know that, you know, as a past practitioner, one of the things that colleagues speak about is kind of communication friendly environments, and perhaps the use of kind of multimodal experiences, you know, with visuals to go with that. Would you have any particular sort of advice on kind of when's the best time to be using those? Because obviously, you know, we're mindful here, we're talking about learners that are very young through to older learners who may not necessarily be comfortable with having explicit visual prompts that are unique to them. So what would your thoughts be on that side of things, if you have any?
I think it's really important to make sure that whatever communication you're using with a person, make sure it's appropriate for that person. So if you're wanting to use visuals with the child, make sure that those visuals are appropriate for the child that you're working with and for the level of comprehension. If you're just downloading pictures from the internet and you're using black and white pictures, there might not be actually much connection between the meaning of what's in the picture. Let's say it's a picture of an apple. It's actually not. It's just sort of like a round black line on a white piece of paper, which is completely different to a physical apple. So if you're using visuals with a child, or a young person, make sure they are appropriate for that child. And if you're using things like a now and next board, consider maybe you might want to use objects of reference first. So now you're going to do your writing and physically give them their pen and piece of paper. And then next is the next activity, and have those as physical objects. So yeah, definitely consider it for the person that you're communicating with. I did want to say another thing, actually, another strategy that is really super important, especially for SEMH, is to just double check for overwhelm. It might actually be that the language might be overwhelming to process for a child or young person, but it might also be any of the other things that they have to process out. It might be there's another child over in the corner who's making funny noises, and then that's causing their ears to be hurting. It might be that they're really hungry, or they haven't had much sleep the last night, or it might be that the room is too hot, or the lights are too bright, or there might be some other things that are just causing this student to just feel really over. There might have been an issue that happened at lunchtime that they're still trying to process and they're still really furious about. So it's actually got nothing to do with the fact that they can't find their pen. You're just adding another extra stressor onto a situation that might already be stressful for the child. So yeah, definitely consider where the situation might just be overwhelmed, and then you can use that waiting strategy, that pausing strategy, just to hold space and buy a little time for things to simmer down.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
fascinating.
Beth.
Thank you.
Really fascinating, isn't it? We could listen to you all day, I think, and like Emma said, squeeze every last little insight out from you. But we really appreciate you joining us. And I think so many of the strategies you've suggested, I think what's great about them is that they're free, and you don't it doesn't take time to prepare for them. So that wait strategy is just fantastic, and something that sort of when I'm out of the classroom now, I think, oh, if only I'd sort of known that so much earlier on in my career. But thank you so much. It has been really great to have you with us and delve into your expertise, amazing insights. So at this point in the episode, we move on to our illuminations, and each month, as many of you who join us regularly will know, we provide those suggestions on next steps, and a bit like Beth suggested, that sort of now and next strategy of what you can do now and what you might do next. So just before we finished, we're going to go back to Beth for one last little bit, and I wonder, Beth, if you could, just to finish things off, give us one maybe golden nugget or recommendation or resource that we could take away today. I mean, I'd use the weight one, that would be my takeaway, but if there's anything else just before we look ahead to next month and close for today, that'd be amazing.
Oh yeah, I think really, yeah, definitely using those strategies and considering how strategies and the behaviour and communication needs of the children that you're working with and the people that you are in front of on a daily basis. Really consider those needs and how that you can meet those needs using those strategies, but also how you can support other members of staff and other people around the child as well, to help with their communication behaviour.
Thank you so much, Beth. And as Emma mentioned, sort of right back at the beginning, we will be looking to revisit the EAL topic as well. Obviously, we couldn't fit everything into one session, so at some point we will be coming back to look at EAL as well, as we know we've got so many international colleagues with us today. So looking ahead to next month's then Searchlights, another hot topic, dyscalculia. So hopefully again we'll be joined by another expert in the field. But this time we've sort of given you a bit of pre-webinar viewing. So we have a webinar on the topic of maths anxiety, which we'd invite you to look at ahead of our SEND Searchlights session. And in that webinar, Rob Jennings and Kat Edel, who are from the Dyscalculia Network, talk to Andy Small, and Andy's our very own assessment specialist here at GL. And they explore the implication of math-specific challenges faced in the classroom worldwide. So we will put a link to that webinar in the chat, and it will be in the follow-up email as well. So if you miss it today, you can find that in that follow-up email. So we do hope you can join us for that. Promises to be another great session. And just before we leave for today, lots of information for you to share some exciting news, which Emma dropped in a little bit earlier, is we do have our very own dedicated microsite for SEND Searchlights now. So if you've been with us before and you've looked for our historic SEND Searchlight sessions, they now have their very own little website where all the episodes are in one place. So if there was a topic that you did want to revisit or share with colleagues, then it should be much easier to find. And of course, all our future episodes will be available there too. So again, we'll pop the link to those microsites in the chat for you as well. So that is all for today. As always, we do welcome your feedback. So I will just pop our QR code up on screen. Here you can obviously share feedback, but also do share any future questions for us. We do look at those questions and then design our episodes around the information we get from you. So it is really tailored to what we're getting. So thank you so much for joining us. We are back at the same time on Tuesday, the 11th of March, where, like I said, we're going to be focusing on all things dyscalculia. So hope to see you then. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. Thanks, everybody. Have a great month.